Let it go, make my body go, make our bodies higher and higher.
Data entry is one of the most basic things we do in Excel, and yet there are some rules, some concepts that you should become familiar with. In this worksheet called Data Entry, or in the workbook called 02 Entering Data, we're going to be creating a small worksheet consisting of about 6 months of data. And since we're not going to be using that many columns, I'm going to use the slider bar in the lower right-hand corner to zoom in. There's that icon roughly in the middle. Slide in this way. That should be good enough. Now, I want to track sales, expenses, and profits. So in cell A2, remember, you can change the location of the active cell by using your arrow keys, or you can simply, by using the mouse, click on a different cell with the left mouse button. I'm going to type in the word sales in cell A2. To complete an entry, we press Enter to move the active cell downward, or Tab to move it rightward. And you can also press any of the 4 arrow keys if you wish. I'm going to press Enter. This moves the active cell into cell A3. I'm going to type the word expenses. As I'm typing it here, maybe I make a mistake, and I catch it right away. I'll press the backspace key, not left arrow, but backspace. Now, maybe I've been working in Canada or Great Britain recently. I've typed it this way, and I realize, oops, that's not the way I want it. And on second thought, maybe I don't want that there at all. I want the word overhead. Often in Excel, rather than erasing a cell, you simply replace it with something else. So I'm going to type the word overhead. I don't have to delete what's already there. I'll type overhead. And enter. Now I'm going to type profits. This time I'm going to make a mistake, but maybe I don't see it right away. I press enter. You can edit a cell or simply retype it. Now I could probably retype profits reasonably fast, but on the other hand, if you'd like to edit a cell, make it be the active cell, and there are 2 approaches. You can click in the formula bar with the mouse and start typing or deleting whatever is needed. For the moment, since I clicked right in front of the G, I could press delete, type an F, and press enter. You can also edit by double-clicking a cell. And you want to be double-clicking near where the error occurred. So I'm going to double-click right in front of or right after the G in profits here, which should be profits, of course. There we are. I'll delete the G, press F, and enter. Now, I'm going to put numbers in here for sales and overhead. I've got caps lock on. I'm about to type 120, and I press O. Now, O and 0 are right next to each other on the keyboard. Maybe I'm not sensing anything wrong. I'm going to press the Tab key here. Now I'm going to type 160. I will type it correctly, and press Tab. And of course, right away, what are we seeing here on the screen? This is right aligned, but the 120 over here, which really is an O, is not. In Excel, if you type a number or a formula, it's automatically right aligned. Every other kind of entry is left aligned. Now, later, if I don't catch this, I'm in trouble if I ever try to write a formula. That's not a number. It's a 120. Therefore, Excel aligns it on the left. How do I fix it? 120. And I'll tab to the right and tab to the right. So I'm going to fill this in with some numbers. Each time I'm going to be pressing tab as I fill in the remainder of the cells here across for 6 different months. Let's say the first 6 months for this business here. And as I get to the end here, I'll simply press enter, and we're going to put in 6 more numbers right here. So basic data entry, numbers are always right aligned and nearly always should stay that way. Possible exception, if you're using ID numbers or code numbers, you might want to have them centered. But we learned back in the 2nd grade, always line up numbers on the right before you add them or subtract them or multiply them. So again, each time as I'm putting the numbers here, I'm tabbing to the right. So basic data entry in Excel. Text entries are automatically left aligned, numbers are automatically right aligned. From time to time, you may want to change the alignment of text, occasionally with numbers, although I strongly suggest against it, except in the case of ID numbers. Numbers are always lined up on the right, text on the left. We're on the worksheet called AutoFill in our workbook 02 Entering Data. We want to put in months at the top here. Now, the AutoFill feature allows us to quickly put in monthly entries and day-of-the-week entries, as well as a few others. So let's imagine I need January here. I'll type it. And even before I complete the entry, I can point to the lower right-hand corner of that cell. That's called the fill handle. The mouse pointer changes to a thin plus. And when it does, I'll hold down the left mouse button and drag rightward. Notice how the pop-up tip below suggests what is about to go into these cells. March, April, May, June. And then let go of the right mouse button and we have all those entries there. Later, of course, we would like to, and we probably will, align them on the right. Now, although we're not going to be putting this in our actual worksheet, I'm going to go down to cell A6 and point out a few aspects of this. First of all, you can start with any month. Maybe I'll start with March. Now, I usually wouldn't start there, but this time I'm going to drag downward. And we see what's about to happen, April, May, June. If I drag farther, eventually we'll come to December, it'll just start all over again, like this. As you drag downward or rightward, if your beginning entry is one of the months, you will automatically get next month, and next month, and so on. Occasionally, but rarely, you might drag upward. And again, we can start with any month. Here's April. This time I'll drag upward. This is going to go backward chronologically. March and February, we're going to see there. Leftward would do the same as that too. We can also use abbreviations, but they must be 3 letters. So typically, again, most often you'd probably start with January, but a simple JAN will get us started. Drag from the corner, just a few cells, you see what's happening. Dragging rightward, the same kind of thing would happen this way, of course. I really don't want to keep this data here. I could press Control-Z. That means undo. So I'd like to undo my last action and the one before it. So I will press Control-Z repeatedly here to get rid of all this data. We also could have highlighted the data and pressed Delete. This works for days of the week as well. Full spellings or 3-letter abbreviations. Never start with TUES or THUR. You'll simply get a repeat. So we see what's happening. If we were going to use this here somehow, we would make column D wider. We'll get to that later. Drag downward, you'd expect to see the same thing. If you do happen to start with one of these 4-letter abbreviations, remember that will not work. You'll simply get a repeat of this, like that. Now, not only do we have these, we also have a few others. I'll just point out a few, then we'll get rid of this data. Anytime you put in the letter Q, followed by or preceded by the numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4, Excel assumes you're talking about or about to enter quarters. And so if we drag a bit too far here from the corner, it'll simply start over. That also works with QTR. It also works with the word quarter. And in nearly any combination with the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, we see some more of these. And you can also do these with dates and with times. If you were to put in a date, here's a date, 7/8/15, enter. After putting in a date, drag from the lower right-hand corner, drag down. You'll automatically get the next day. If we keep dragging, we'll get the next day, next day, next day. Drag upward, we'll get the previous day. And there are other techniques here we can use too with AutoFill. So take advantage of it. It's handy, it's fast. So I've seen some examples of how AutoFill quickly allows us to put in monthly entries and, where needed, day of the week entries or even dates and quarters when appropriate. Excel has a great deal of computational capability when it comes to working with dates, also a number of built-in functions that allow you to work with dates efficiently. If you're typing a date entry in Excel, use slash or dash as the separator. Now, in the United States, typically we display month, day, year, and that's the way we type it. In other countries, it could be day, month, year. To type an entry like this, and I'll just type another one here in cell B5, a different date, November 11/17/ and if it's 2016, I'll type a 16, enter. I can also type a dash, same effect, January 3rd, 2016. Type it this way, press enter. Anytime you type entries using slashes or dashes, Excel evaluates that entry with the possibility that it could be a date, and if it is, it displays it this way. And by the way, if you try an impossible date, how about 11/31? There are not 31 days in November. 15, enter. Excel displays this on the left side. Now, it doesn't scream out at you and say error, but it certainly looks different than other date entries. Now, long story short, date entries actually are numbers and they're lined up on the right side automatically. And when they're not, like this, it raises a flag, and you have to figure out sometimes why it didn't work. Same thing is going to be true of leap year. 2/29/16 is just fine, but 2/29/15 isn't. No such day. So we see that. That's handy. If you do put in dates using a slash or a dash, they always get displayed with slashes. But more important is the idea that you've entered something here that can be used later. There's an Excel function that'll tell you which day of the week this is. If you're comparing this with another date, Excel, by way of a formula, can tell you how much time has elapsed between this. Or you could write another formula that adds 100 days to this to find out when the 100-day period after this ends, or subtract 100 days from it. You can subtract dates, you can add numbers to dates, you can subtract numbers from dates. If you're entering times, use a colon. 1643 might not be the way you display times, so you might type it this way: 4:43 p.m. You can type p.m., but the letter P is good enough. And unbeknownst to you, at this point, this is being stored as a value. So even here, comparing this with another time, you can actually subtract the entries. So you can make times be displayed with AM or PM, or simply in 24-hour style. And there's a lot more detail behind the scenes here too. When you go to formulas here, and mostly for dates, but also date and time collectively, various functions here that allow you to manipulate data. So it's something to keep an eye on. For the time being, just remember, enter dates with slash or dash, and there's one oddity you might encounter. You should be alert to it, be aware of it. I'm putting in a date here, and I work for a company that keeps track not only of current employees, but also retirees. So one of our retirees, born in 1930, is now quite old. Enter, that's the way we would read that. There's another employee here, born about a year earlier, in 1929. Type it this way, press enter. That doesn't look like 1929, does it? For the time being, and Microsoft will change this in a few years, all years from 30 through 99 are automatically considered last century. Now, if you type a 4-digit year, you automatically determine which year it is exactly. So instead of getting 2029 here, we should have typed 11/4/1929. So all years from 0 through 29 are automatically this century. In the past, Microsoft has changed the split point, but just be alert to that. For most users, this is not an issue, but occasionally it raises its head, and of course you catch that one almost immediately. Type all dates with slash or dash, and then you've got the possibility eventually of using these in a numerical and computational way. Type time entries with a colon, and there too, the possibility of using these computationally is open. As with anything, we make mistakes, and Excel is no exception. There will be times when we take certain actions, and we'd rather not have the effect of them take place, because sometimes it's pretty drastic. So, maybe I'm a novice in Excel, and I've realized that these numbers are all incorrect. So, maybe I just click row 2, and that highlights them all. And I'm not too sure what to do here. So, on the Home tab, I see a choice here called Delete. Delete cells, that sounds right. I want to delete these cells. But now I realized I did a lot more than I wanted to, and it got rid of that other data. I'd like to undo that. There's an undo arrow in the quick access toolbar. Second button from the left up there. Notice it's got a keystroke shortcut, Control-Z, an easy keystroke combination. Two keys very close to one another. Undo. Let's undo this. By the way, when you point there, the word undo is followed by the last action that you took. Now, sometimes it's not exact. In other words, it's a little vague, but in this case, it doesn't say delete cells or delete rows, but we want to undo that. And it can be a real lifesaver at certain times. There's no question about that. Now, let's explore this a little bit. There's another arrow up there called redo. It's to the right of it. I'm going to make some changes here, and you may or may not know some of the features I'm about to use, but they're on the Home tab. I'm going to make this cell bold and make this one here italics. Now, that isn't a great design feature. I'm going to click and drag across these and make them yellow. And maybe I'm just exploring some of the features, but I've decided I don't really like those. Now I can press Control-Z repeatedly to undo not only my last action, but the one before, But you'll notice here that the undo button has a tiny little arrow to its right. A drop arrow, a down arrow. I'm going to click it, And here are recent actions that I can undo. You can only undo consecutive actions. So I could undo my last 3 actions, or 4 or 5, all the way back to 8. Ultimately, you can undo up to 100 of your last actions. Now, I've just opened Excel recently, so I can't go back that far. But let's say I want to undo these last 4 actions here. Now, when you undo, the actions that you undid are then recoverable, if need be, in the category called Redo. If we click the drop arrow there, here are the actions that I've just undone. So it sounds kind of funny to say it, but if you'd like to undo the undo, then you do a redo. So maybe I'll go back here and redo these. Now, obviously we're just exploring here, but undo and redo have a relationship with one another. Control Z will undo the action. Control Y will take you in the other direction. I'm pressing Control Y here. Now I'll press Control Z a few times, going backward the other way. Gets a little confusing at times, but you want to have that knowledge, that comfort that says, okay, I can make some serious mistakes. That certainly is not my goal, nor do I want to, but yet we can recover from these. There are certain actions, however, that you cannot undo, and although we're not going to be trying any of these, if you were to, on one of the sheet tabs, say the current one here, undo, redo, if we right-click here, here are some actions here. These are actions that we cannot undo. And also on the View tab up in the ribbon, many of the features here we cannot undo. But for the most part, the commands that destroy data, those are the ones we worry about. And sometimes we make them inadvertently. We want to be able to undo those. Either Control Z repeatedly, or in the case of just one action, Control Z, or the undo button up in the quick access toolbar. And from time to time, although not as often, you'll be using redo as well. There could be certain actions where you're trying a particular chart type. You may have seen column charts, bar charts in Excel. Sometimes you'll create a bar chart and not like it, and then switch to a column chart, and then maybe reconsider. You could press Control Z and Control Y and kind of go back and forth and assess the two. A really handy tool and sometimes really valuable. Undo and redo. Providing documentation on a worksheet is not something that a lot of Excel users are concerned with, but there could be times when you're working with a worksheet you've never seen before. Seeing a comment helps, and sometimes it explains how an unusual formula got there or whether a number is really viable. Let's suppose that this 360 value in cell G3 on this worksheet called Comments isn't firm. In other words, we're not sure if it's the correct value. But our friend Stacy, who's responsible for giving me the numbers, would know. So let's add a comment here. We can do this by way of Shift F2, or we can right-click here and Insert Comment. Usually you'll see your name there, and so I'm going to add a comment. And you can make that box bigger or smaller as you're editing this, and there are even ways to change the shape of it. That's usually not too critical. So make it a little bit smaller here. Click outside this, it disappears. You'll notice a red triangle there, so I'll slide over this and it pops up. Now I might want to add another one. Same thing over here. Max is in charge of our sales numbers here, and I'm thinking maybe that's not correct, so I'm going to add a comment there. I'll press Shift F2, it's another way to get there. See Max about this. Maybe I'll be sending this workbook to somebody else, and I want to make sure they see these notes here. Click outside of it. So we see 2 red triangles. Slide over this one, slide over that one. We also have an option on the Review tab, Show All Comments. We see them there. There are also ways to print these, by the way. We might want to do that. Or if we only want to see 1 or 2, we can come back, click this again, hide them all. We can right-click on one of these and show that comment, but not the other. So we can show 1 or a few or all or none, using these various options here. Now, I remember a few years ago getting a workbook from somebody, and one of the worksheets had about 400 comments on them, and it just drove me crazy. So it's not a feature that you want to use all the time. And also, by the way, when you right-click here, you can delete the comment if you no longer need it. And you can come back and edit the comment if you wish. That makes it stay open, make a change here that really should have been capitalized, and so I make that change. Click outside of it. It's still there, still visible, of course. Right-click, and I simply want to hide the comment. So there we are there. These red triangles do not print, but they alert you to the fact that you've got a comment there. And most often they are used for explaining unusual formulas, or in the example we see here, where you're simply trying to alert somebody about the accuracy of a number, give them a reference where they can check it out. Adding comments, something you appreciate when others do it, and it does help explain how certain features are used in an Excel workbook. In this workbook called 02 Entering Data, it's a workbook that has different sheets in it. We've been working with it for a while. But let's imagine this is a brand new workbook. You're likely to see a name like Book 1 or Book 2. After putting in some data, you want to make sure that the data you've entered, and possibly some formulas were added too, you want to make sure that that's saved. And the question comes up, particularly with novices, whether in Excel or Word or PowerPoint, when we go to the File tab, should we use Save or Save As? Save As is always a little bit safer. And when you're saving a workbook for the first time, in other words, you started with a blank workbook, you added information, you now want to save it. Save As is always the safer way to go. Start with Save As. Your screen might look a little different depending upon which version of Windows you're using, but the first order of business is to decide where we want to save this. In this case, maybe I'm going to choose Browse, and I'll choose, in this example, Desktop. But when you go to Save As, you have the options of saying what it is you want to name the file. If this were a new workbook, it would simply say something like Book 1 here. From time to time, although usually less important, we need to save this as a different file type. Now, if you're only working with Excel and other people in your environment are working with the same version of Excel, you probably won't be touching this very much at all. But what if the workbook you're about to save needs to be sent to somebody who's using an older version of Excel? Click the drop arrow to the right of the Save As Type panel, right here. Now, lots of choices here, but if I were trying to save this for somebody still using Excel 2003, I would point to the choice up here, Excel 97-2003 Workbook. You see some other choices here. You could be needing to save Excel in one of these forms. I think for most Excel users, you don't need this very often, but do be aware of that idea. The name, you've got up to 255 characters you can use here. If I want to save this under a different name, now remember, often if it's new, it's going to say Book 1, but maybe you want to call this First Half Sales. Remember, up to 255 characters you can use here. For the most part, stay away from special characters. Underscore is okay, dash is okay, but don't use an asterisk, a slash, or certain other characters. And rather than worrying about which ones work and don't work, pretty much stay away from those. Where we save it, of course, you would know something about your environment. Do you want to save it on the hard drive? Do you have a flash drive plugged in right now? Do you want to save it there? In my example here, I'm simply going to put it on the desktop. Make that choice there. Maybe I'll put it next to these files here. Here's the name I want. I'll click Save. And there's that name at the top there. Later, after making some additions here, putting in some other data here, I'll want to make sure that what I've got saved and what I'm seeing here are the same. So I'll go back to either the button in the upper left-hand corner and click it, or perhaps press Ctrl-S. Going back to the File tab and choosing Save As typically isn't necessary, although you certainly can do it. Again, if there's any concern about what you're calling the file, its name, or where you're storing it, or what file type it is, go to Save As. But as a general rule of thumb, you use Save As when you're saving a file for the first time. Thereafter, you can use Save. And you don't even have to go through the File menu. If we simply want to update this, meaning we've added some data and we want to make sure that it's been saved, we'll simply click that button in the upper left corner or press Ctrl-S. So, in recapping, Save As, perhaps safer. You don't need to use it all the time. Occasional use of it when you're concerned about changing the file name or saving it in a different location or changing its file type. Otherwise, a quick file save much of the time means update. That's what you do after the file's already created.